consecrate us in the truth.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus came into the district of Judea and across the Jordan. Again crowds gathered around him, and as was his custom, he again taught them. The Pharisees approached him and asked, "Is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife?" They were testing him. He said to them in reply, "What did Moses command you?" They replied, "Moses permitted a husband to write a bill of divorce and dismiss her." But Jesus told them, "Because of your hardness of hearts, he wrote this command. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate." In the house, the disciples again questioned Jesus about this, and he said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." The Gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The theme of Mark's Gospel is pretty clear. It's the conversation that the disciples were having with Jesus about the topic of divorce. However, I want to use James's letter to start with. It's such a great letter. If you have time between now and the beginning of Lent, look at James' letter. All of last week's readings and this week's readings from the first reading were all from James. It's a book of wisdom in the New Testament. It's practical advice with a Christian flair. And today is no different. Every aspect of James' letter is one of how to behave in the world. And today is great. I mean, just think of this in reference to preparing for Lent. Because people are saying, "Oh, what am I going to give up for Lent? Who gives up candy? Who gives up sugar? Who gives up whatever they give up?" And you know what? Okay. I came across a phrase recently when I was reading in preparation of Lent. Sometimes people's fasting becomes no more than pious dieting. Think about it. In other words, it becomes useless. It becomes something we should be doing anyway. You shouldn't be having so much sugar, you shouldn't be having so much salt, you shouldn't be having so much alcohol, so much food, etc., etc. So that we come to Lent, I got to give up something, I'll give up chocolate, I'll give up salt, I'll give up as many drinks a day. You know, the story goes on. And it's all like a bargaining with God. And that also reflects today in the Gospel. We'll talk about that in a second. It's like a bargaining with God. So it becomes pious dieting and not real fasting. Fasting is staying away, and listen to James, from complaints, from judging, from ridicule of one another. And think of how many of us are the opposite of what he also quotes, compassionate and merciful to one another. Consider how many of us gossip, how many of us hurt, how many of us are unfaithful, and that relates to the Gospel of Mark today, because the concept was marriage being between a man and woman as God instituted it by nature. And Mark is reiterating the fidelity that goes back to the Old Testament guidelines. Last week I was in Florida in the church, and the Knights of Columbus of that parish, that particular day in St. Stephen's in Valrico, sponsored renewal of marriage promises. I guess it's because it was February, and so after the homily, all the people there who were married stood and renewed their promises, their marriage promises, which is very nice. The covenant that represents of a man and woman is modeled on the covenant of God with his people. In Old Testament terminology, the word is hesed. It means covenant. It means coming together. And when the Jews broke their hesed, broke their covenant with God, and you heard they were punished so many times. The Babylonian captivity is one of the prime examples of that. But always they came back. Always they came back to God, and always He received them. Now relate that to a husband and wife. There's a process in the church that we know it's called annulment. And basically what annulment is these two people were not able to come together in authentic, mature hesed, covenant. These two people looked like they were of age, acted like they were of age, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, but authentically weren't. So therefore the church looks at a marriage and says, we can annul it. Even though there's children, we can annul it, because it should not have happened. Okay, now, the church, that's not a Catholic divorce, by the way. It's an annulment. And the model of the annulment goes back, the model of marriage goes back to creation, when God made them male and female and asked them to multiply and fill the earth. And that's what Jesus is relying on. But then the Jews who are questioning Jesus, they have a little bit of a game plan up their sleeve. Oh, but Moses allowed divorce. And he says, Moses allowed divorce because of your hardness of your hearts. Because you were like the Italians, like Cappadocs. You were hard-headed people, hard-hearted people. So he allowed it. And that's been a problem, both for Jews and for Christians. The fact that there was such a thing in the Judeo-Christian custom as divorce. But the authenticity of a relationship is modeled on the authenticity of God's relationship with us. And sometimes we sin, hence the whole period of Lent. Sometimes we sin and are divorced from God by ourselves. God is always there reaching out to us, but we divorce ourselves from God through sin, through and his James's examples, through gossip, through judgment, through taking advantage of one another. So the divorce between us and God is very similar at times to divorce between a man and woman. And if you look at that, the reasons are numerous. Infidelity being one of them. How many times we're unfaithful to God. Misbehavior, abuse. How many times are we abusive of one another? And all these things are very reflective of our relationship with God, because if we sin against one person, we're sinning against God. And if we are honest and complete, and as James said, yes is yes and no is no, that's honesty. We're honest with one another, we're being honest with God. So when it comes to divorce, and we know a lot of Catholics are divorced, and a lot of Catholics are divorced and remarried, most of them with annulments. As Francis our Pope said, who am I to judge? And that's what each of us has to say. We have to hold up a mirror to ourselves and say, who am I to judge him or her being separated or divorced? You weren't in their shoes. You weren't in their bedroom. You weren't in their lives. You don't know the degree of faithlessness, abuse, anger, pain. And that's up to counselors, and that's up to ministers, pastoral ministers, to look at when we consider how a marriage can be, quote, annulled. But it's very important even before that to realize that, and look at this family here today, and I know most of you are prime timers, and here because the Mass is for the deceased members of the prime timers, you're not going to get married, probably. But your children, your grandchildren, as they walk down the aisle or prepare to walk down the aisle, through your example, we have to show them hesed, covenant connection, loyalty, faithfulness, oneness, honesty. And if you don't reflect that,
You're not teaching them anything, and they're not going to reflect it. And if you reflect it and show it, and even your relationship with God, the honest, the faithful connection that you have with God, not to shove their face in it, but by example. If you don't do it, they're not going to learn it. If they don't learn it, it's our fault. The adult in church's fault. So we have today in the scriptures the promise of God being one with us through Hesed, through the covenant, and the challenge for us to be one with each other in marriage and in relationships. And the quality of that relationship, based on James's example, without judgment, without hardship, without impatience, but with compassion and mercy toward one another. What a way to begin our preparation and our examination of conscience moving into Lent. Perfect.